Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet journey into the past. Today, we will wander through the slow, often overlooked moments of history, the ones that shaped lives, ideas, and the world we know, quietly and without fanfare. Here, time moves gently. We will linger in workshops, libraries, and sunlit streets, following ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of patience and care. So find a comfortable place, let your mind settle, and allow the stories of centuries past to unfold, slowly, like pages turning under candlelight. This is boring past times for sleep where history whispers, and you can drift into the calm rhythm of the past. By the time the story of Selene and Endymion spread beyond the quiet hills of Caria, the Greeks had already turned their gods into mirrors. Every divine act, from Zeus's thunder to Poseidon's tides, reflected something human: fear, love, or desire. Selena's nightly ride was no exception. She, too, had been humanized. Her endless orbit turned into a love story about the longing to pause time in the earliest versions. Selene was no great goddess of Olympus. She belonged to the older order, the Titans, those primordial beings who embodied the structure of the world itself. Her father was Hyperion, the light that rose before dawn, and her mother was the glow of divine sight. Together with her siblings, Helios the sun and Eos the dawn, she completed the daily rhythm of light. But while her brother burst across the sky in brilliance, and her sister painted it in morning rose, Selene was subtle. Her job was not to illuminate, but to soothe, to make the night less fearful. In this, she was both indispensable and easily forgotten. The ancients often gave her few temples, few hymns. Her name was whispered, not shouted. Yet her image, a woman crowned with the crescent moon, appeared on coins, mosaics, and pottery for centuries, a faint and steady symbol of continuity. The dream of Endymion, the myth, says that when Selene descended to Mount Latmos, she found Endymion asleep among his sheep, his face calm in the silver light. She loved him instantly. Some versions say she asked Zeus to grant him eternal youth, others eternal sleep. Still others claim that she herself cast the spell, preferring him silent and motionless, perfect, untouched, endlessly dreaming. This detail often puzzled later philosophers. What sort of love, they asked, seeks not the beloved's company but his stillness? It is a question that lingers across centuries, perhaps a reflection of the moon's own distance from the earth. Selene could watch, but never stay. The only way to preserve her love was to freeze it in time. As the sky freezes its stars, the ancient poets, who loved paradoxes, found something tender in that contradiction. In one hymn, Selene visits Endymion each night, lighting his cave with her glow, pressing soft kisses on his closed eyelids. He never wakes. The world sleeps too, wrapped in the quiet cycle of moonlight. For all her immortality, she is trapped in repetition, forever arriving, forever watching, forever leaving. This repetition mirrors the way the Greeks themselves experienced time. Unlike our modern sense of progress, moving forward, accumulating their time was circular. The seasons turned, festivals returned, the moon waxed and waned, and history itself seemed to move not in lines but in loops. Selena's story was therefore less a romance than a metaphor, love as rhythm, devotion as return, The shrine at Latma's archaeologists have found traces of small shrines in the mountains of Caria, where the myth of Selene and Endymion was said to have originated. Simple altars, little more than piles of stone, stood near caves and springs. These were not grand places of sacrifice, but quiet spaces where shepherds or travelers might leave a small token, a coin, a carved figure, a cup of milk. Offerings to Selene were modest, often tied to sleep and fertility. In some inscriptions, she was invoked as Nymph, the bride, or Phosphoros, the light bringer. But unlike the fiery Apollo or the warlike Athena, Selene's presence was domestic. People asked her for calm dreams, for safe childbirth, for light on a journey through the mountains. To pray to Selene was not to demand a miracle, it was to request peace. Endymion's cave was believed to exist near the ancient city of Heraclea by Latmos. Close to the marshes of the Meander River, pilgrims came to see it, though few wrote much about what they found. Perhaps there was little to see: a hollow in the rock, a cool draught, the sound of dripping water. Yet that simplicity was its power. In the stillness, visitors imagined the sleeping shepherd, untouched by time and the moonlight descending upon him each night. Fascinated by the connection between gods and the human body, often tied divine myths to natural phenomena. The physician Hippocrates, writing in the 5th century BCE, noted that sleep followed the rhythm of the moon and the tides, what we now call circadian cycles. He believed the moon affected not only the sea, but also the fluids of the body, subtly drawing them upward and downward as she changed. This theory was less mystical than it sounds. The moon, after all, measured time, and time measured life. Farmers, physicians, and sailors all depended on her steady cycles. In medical texts, certain treatments were recommended only under specific lunar phases: bloodletting under a waning moon, childbirth during a waxing one. These beliefs, while not scientific in the modern sense, reflected careful observation built over generations of slow living. In a sense, the myth of Selene and Endymion dramatized this invisible connection. The sleeping shepherd became a symbol of the human body's surrender to cosmic rhythm. His endless rest was not laziness or death, but alignment, his heartbeat matching the moon's slow passage across the heavens. Selene's sisters and the spread of her image over time. Selena's identity merged with that of Artemis, the huntress. Both ruled the night, both were protectors of women and travelers, and both were linked to the rhythms of fertility. But where Artemis was fierce and free, Selene remained contemplative, the moon before it became a goddess of action. Later poets, especially in the Hellenistic and Roman eras, confused the two, so that Luna, Diana, and Selene became nearly interchangeable. Yet, in Greek art, Selene remained distinct. On the Parthenon's east pediment, her chariot appears at dawn, the horses' hooves just touching the frame as they rise from the sea. She looks neither triumphant nor sorrowful, merely steady. The sculptor's marble folds convey motion without hurry, as if even stone could reflect the moon's grace. This artistic restraint matched the tone of her myth. Unlike Zeus's thunderbolts or Aphrodite's passions, Selena's stories contained no violence, no betrayal, no loud declarations. Her drama was quiet, a goddess who simply refused to stop looking at the one she loved. Time, memory, and the unending gaze, the Greeks often imagined that gods embodied natural laws. To them, Selena's devotion to Endymion was a law, not of love, but of observation. The moon, after all, never closes her eyes. She sees everything that happens beneath her, the ships at sea, the soldiers in their camps, the lovers in their beds, the lonely shepherd on his hill, and she remembers. The ancients spoke of moon madness, lunacy, the strange pull that drove some men to wander at night, speaking to themselves. They believed the moon stirred forgotten memories, dreams, and longings. So, when they told of Selena's endless watching, they were also describing themselves. Humanity, too, was always looking up at patterns, stars, faces in the dark, searching for meaning. The moon became a mirror for that longing, and her slow journey across the night, a comfort, a reminder that even silence could be faithful. The boredom of the divine modern readers sometimes miss how boring Greek worship could be. For every grand festival with torches and songs, there were dozens of small, repetitive tasks: cleaning altars, pouring libations, reciting prayers by rote. Selena's cult was especially monotonous, a nightly rhythm of quiet offerings. The priestesses who tended her small sanctuaries would light lamps, whisper hymns, and then wait. The goddess was not one to answer loudly, and yet, in that boredom, lay devotion. The Greeks did not expect their gods to entertain them. They expected them to endure. Selena's story, repeated endlessly in ritual and art, reminded people that constancy, the refusal to rush, was itself divine. Selena's patience in a restless world, perhaps that is why her myth persisted even after the rise of newer, faster gods. When Christianity spread through Greece and the Roman Empire, the moon lost her divinity, but not her hold on the imagination. Artists still painted her face in the halos of saints. Poets still wrote of her glow as the emblem of pure love. Astronomers, gazing through crude lenses, still felt wonder at her pale steadiness. The shepherd Endymion faded into metaphor, the sleeping world beneath the watching sky. And Selene, though stripped of her name, continued her quiet duty, circling above the restless earth with no audience but the shadows below. Even now, the myth lingers wherever light meets sleep, in the blue hush before midnight, in the silence after prayer, in the patient turning of the night. The Greeks, who so often sought meaning in motion, found in Selene something else, the sanctity of stillness. And so the question remains: if Selene never tires of circling the world to gaze upon her sleeping shepherd, what might she think of those who no longer look back? Before cities hummed and clocks ticked, before the nights were interrupted by the glow of street lamps or the hum of machines, the ancient Greeks had only the slow, silent wheel of the sky to tell them time. Every evening, shepherds in the hills of Arcadia lifted their eyes toward that dim, silvery disk rising over the horizon, the moon, Selena's chariot, beginning its unhurried circuit above the world. The Greeks believed that the heavens were filled not with distant, burning suns, but with gods who followed routines just as humans did. To them, Selene was a being of patience and persistence. Each night she set out on her long drive from the Oceanus in the east to the opposite edge of the world, her horse's hooves silent, her silver cloak spreading over the world like frost. Yet while the poets praised her beauty and lovers swore by her light, Few people thought much about why her chariot moved so slowly. Why did the moon linger so long in the night sky, changing her shape so gradually, as if reluctant to leave? In Athens or Corinth, a philosopher might have tried to calculate her motion. But in the hills, where shepherds counted days by the moon's swelling and shrinking, time felt different, circular, patient, endless, the rhythm of boredom and survival in early Greek life. The moon was not a thing of romance, but a calendar. The very word month comes from min, meaning moon. Festivals, plantings, and rituals all followed her slow rhythm. For the men who lived among their flocks, her glow was simply practical. Imagine a shepherd lying on a rocky slope, his woolen cloak pulled tight against the chill. His flock murmurs and shifts nearby. The night is long, the fire small. He watches as the moon climbs, tracing the same faint arc she has taken for countless generations. There is no urgency, no distraction. The stillness of the sky becomes a sort of clock, not one that tells the hour, but one that marks endurance. Each phase of the moon meant something. The waxing crescent, time to shear sheep. The full moon, a marker for trade in nearby towns. The dark moon, a night for rest and caution. To people who lived by the rhythms of nature, Selena's slow journey wasn't just decoration, it was structure. But even structure could feel mysterious. Why, they wondered, did the moon sometimes vanish for days? Why did her light fade, then return? The philosophers had answers of sorts. Pythagoreans murmured about reflections of sunlight. But to the average herdsman, these ideas were distant, abstract, like the murmuring of cicadas in the fields. The simple truth, for them, was that Selene had moods. Some nights she glowed with fullness, watching over travelers and lovers alike. On others, she disappeared, retreating from the sky, perhaps to rest or to mourn. The gods, after all, were known to take their time. Selene and Endymion, one story, a quiet one, not sung often in the grand temples, told of why Selene moved so slowly. The tale goes that she fell in love with a mortal shepherd named Endymion, who tended his sheep on Mount Latmos. But not remarkable, a quiet man who spent his nights alone among his sheep, listening to the wind, counting the stars, and falling asleep beneath the glow of the moon. Selene saw him there, sleeping peacefully, and was so captivated by his stillness that she descended from her chariot just to watch him closer. She fell in love not with a hero or a warrior, but with someone ordinary. That alone makes the myth feel different, slower, gentler, almost domestic. The gods of Olympus often loved with storms and fire, but Selena's love was sleep. She visited Endymion every night, brushing his hair from his forehead, watching the rise and fall of his breath. And when Zeus offered Endymion a choice of gifts, he chose eternal sleep, so that Selene might visit him forever, without the disturbance of aging or waking. From then on, it was said Selena's chariot circled slowly, lingering each night to gaze upon her beloved sleeping shepherd. The moon's delay in crossing the sky, her faint changes in brightness, all of these became signs of her love. It is, of course, a melancholy story. Love and sleep, repetition and devotion, for a people who measured their lives by the cycles of the moon. It explained something deeper than astronomy, why the heavens seemed both constant and sorrowful. The moon's work in the ordinary world Yet myths aside, the Greeks treated the moon with surprising practicality. Farmers watched her for signs of change. Fishermen timed their catches by her light. Even the city-states based their festivals on lunar cycles. The Athenians, for example, divided their months into 3 distinct periods: the waxing, the full, and the waning moon. Every civic and religious act depended on that cycle. When the moon appeared thin and pale, it was a time for beginnings, for marriages, dedications, or planting. The full moon was for celebration and gathering, when her light allowed travel and festivity even at night. The waning moon brought endings, reflection, and rest. These habits, dull, methodical, endlessly repeated, gave rhythm to Greek life. The moon's motion, so slow and predictable, became the heartbeat of civilization. Without her, even the great city calendars would have fallen into confusion. One can imagine, perhaps, a sleepy priest in Athens, climbing the steps of a temple to mark the new moon, his torch flickering in the night wind. He scratches a line into a wax tablet, noting the phase, the date, and the corresponding festival. Nothing dramatic, nothing divine, just paperwork under moonlight. Yet through such monotonous acts, entire societies kept time. Selena's chariot in philosophy. By the 5th century BCE, thinkers began to question these old tales. Anaxagoras argued that the moon was not a goddess at all, but a stone, a vast, sunlit rock reflecting light toward the earth. He was later accused of impiety for saying so, because to strip Selene of her divinity felt like dismantling part of the sky's very meaning. But even as science crept in, the old image of the moon's chariot lingered. Plato and Aristotle, though far more rational, still spoke of the celestial spheres moving in perfect circles, not as divine vehicles, perhaps, but as ordered mechanisms in a vast cosmic design. To the ordinary citizen, this made little difference. Whether the moon was a goddess or a glowing stone, she still rose at her hour, still traced her path over sleeping hills, still watched the shepherds who dozed under her pale light, the slow circle of faith. There is something comforting in that kind of predictability. The moon never hurried, never faltered. Her pace was one of indifference, the same in war and in peace, in feast and in famine. Perhaps that is why the Greeks, who built temples and theories and tragedies alike, treated her with quiet reverence. Her temples were few and humble, small shrines, sometimes shared with Helios, the sun god, or with Artemis, who came to be confused with Selene in later myths. Unlike Zeus's thunderous altars or Apollo's shining oracles, Selena's worship was almost private. She was a goddess for quiet people, night watchers, insomniacs, wanderers, and, perhaps, those who found comfort in boredom. When the Greeks spoke of her chariot, they did not imagine a roaring, fiery vehicle like Helios's blazing cart. Hers was gentle, drawn by pale horses, or even by oxen, moving soundlessly through the clouds. The ancients might have called that divine restraint. We might call it patience, the sleep of the world. As the centuries passed, Selena's story merged with others. The Romans would call her Luna, the poets would write her into tragedies and love songs, and astronomers would slowly strip her myths away. But for a long time, for hundreds of slow, luminous years, she remained the same figure to those who looked upward at night. Even now, when we speak of moonlight, it's hard not to imagine something soft, personal, and unhurried. The science of orbits can explain her movement, but it cannot explain why that movement feels peaceful. Perhaps that feeling is what the shepherds sensed long before philosophy or astronomy, that some patterns, however slow or monotonous, bring comfort simply because they repeat. The Greeks may have invented drama and democracy, but they also invented the art of waiting, of watching the moon trace her quiet path again and again, while life unfolded below her silver gaze. And as Selena's chariot drifts higher each night, circling the world with deliberate grace, one might still wonder, if she lingers so long to look upon us, what does she see in return? By the time the Roman poets began to borrow Greek tales and polish them into Latin verse, Selena's quiet story had already aged into legend. The Romans called her Luna. The Italians before them had known her as Mini or Noctiluca, the night shiner. Her name changed, but her pace never did. Each culture watched her the same way, slowly, silently, as she crossed the night with the unhurried patience of eternity, from goddess to calendar when Rome grew powerful enough to manage time itself. The moon began to lose her hold over human schedules. The Romans devised new calendars, first lunar, then solar. Julius Caesar, impatient with the irregularities of lunar months, commissioned his famous reform, the Julian calendar, in 46 BCE. It fixed the year to the sun rather than to the moon, smoothing out the months into predictable order. It was, in some ways, the end of Selene's reign. No longer would each month begin with her first sliver of light. No longer would farmers, priests, and magistrates wait for her to set their clocks. The calendar became human-made, rational, civic, less poetic, more efficient. But for ordinary people, the moon remained the real clock. Peasants, travelers, fishermen, and shepherds still looked upward, trusting her pale light more than the official dates carved on Roman tablets. You could not, after all, plow by decree or navigate by paperwork. The moon still rose where the horizon allowed, unbothered by imperial reforms. And so, even as Rome's cities grew louder, Selene continued her silent procession, invisible to bureaucrats, visible to everyone else. The poets, sensitive to such losses, began to mourn her subtly. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, described her descent to Endymion with tender melancholy, noting how she guides her quiet steeds and bends her gaze upon the sleeper. By then, her myth had already become less a theology than a lullaby, something told not to command worship but to comfort rest, the sleep of stone. Centuries later, sculptors began to carve her into marble again, though now she appeared beside other celestial figures, the dawn, the personifications of time and night, in Roman sarcophagi. Selene often hovered above sleeping figures, a crescent on her brow, her hands outstretched in a gesture of calm blessing. Art historians note that her image was used in funerary reliefs, not as a goddess of death, but as one of gentle passage. The moon's light represented transition, not ending, but rest. The idea that Endymion slept forever became a metaphor for peace after life. To carve Selene above a tomb was to wish that the dead might be watched over by her calm, patient gaze. Even when belief faded, the visual rhythm endured. The same crescent that once marked her chariot's path now crowned saints and angels in Christian art, a quiet inheritance from Greek imagination. The moon had become eternal by ceasing to be divine. The persistence of moonlight meanwhile. The philosophers and astronomers of the late classical world, Aristotle, Hipparchus, Ptolemy, transformed Selena's mystery into measurement. They mapped her cycles, her phases, her eclipses. They built instruments to track her slow motion and to calculate her influence on tides and seasons. To them, the moon was no longer a goddess, but a body, an object of study, not of prayer. Yet the language of devotion never quite disappeared. Even the driest astronomical treatises spoke of her beauty, her constancy, her gentle wandering. Science had replaced mythology, but emotion had not left, and perhaps that was inevitable. For in all their calculations, the ancients could not speed her up. The moon's patience defied human control. Her orbit, indifferent to empire or era, continued its slow rhythm, visible from every terrace, every harbor, every lonely mountain where a shepherd might still watch his flock under her light, from Selene to Science in Alexandria. Around the 2nd century BCE, astronomers worked by lamplight to plot her path on parchment. They drew circles within circles, marking the positions of her rise and fall, her monthly dance with the earth's shadow. Their calculations were precise, but imperfect. The moon, it turned out, refused exactness. Her orbit was irregular, her movement full of subtle hesitations. To measure her was to admit imperfection. Even centuries later, when Galileo turned his telescope upon her, he saw not a smooth, divine face, but craters and shadows, landscapes of stone. Yet even in that revelation there was beauty. Galileo called her surface mountainous, like the earth, and wrote that the sunlight sliding across her ridges was a silent dawn upon another world. The myth of Selene had become science, but the feeling remained the same, quiet awe at the slow motion of light across darkness. The afterlife of Endymion's sleep, too, never truly ended. Renaissance poets revived his image as the emblem of tranquil love, passion without noise, affection without possession. In John Keats's long, drowsy poem, Endymion, 1818, the shepherd's sleep becomes a symbol for dreamers who love the unattainable. The lines open with the now famous phrase, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever," as though beauty itself had learned patience from the moon. Painters followed suit. 19th century canvases are filled with pale landscapes. A glowing moon hovering above a motionless figure, sometimes Endymion, sometimes simply the sleeper. The story had wandered far from its Greek roots, yet its emotional rhythm remained intact. The world still needed the moon as a metaphor for what could not be rushed, the quiet science of tideseven in our modern electric age. The moon continues her invisible labor. Her gravitational pull shapes the tides, lifting and lowering the oceans in great, slow breaths. Each ripple of water, from the Aegean to the Atlantic, echoes her ancient movement across the sky. It is a humbling thought that the same quiet force that once guided shepherds' dreams now guides the movement of entire seas. And yet she does so without sound, without celebration, without applause. Selena's work remains what it always was, unhurried, unseen, essential. Boredom as the shape of eternity. If there is a lesson buried in the myth of Selene, it might be this: not everything sacred must be exciting. The Greeks, who filled their world with passionate gods and chaotic stories, also preserved one figure who embodied calm repetition. The moon's slow chariot reminds us that constancy, doing the same thing forever with grace, is its own kind of power. Selene never rebelled, never waged war, never demanded temples or hymns. She simply kept her route, circling again and again, illuminating those who needed her light. In a restless age, whether Roman or modern, that kind of patience can seem otherworldly. The moon's boredom, if we can call it that, became humanity's rhythm. Farmers planted by her, poets wrote by her, lovers waited for her. Every generation found in her slowness a reflection of its own longing to pause time, if only for a moment. The light that watches imagine now. That same ancient shepherd from section 1, the man on the hillside, his cloak wrapped tight, his flock asleep. He does not know the names of the constellations or the mathematics of lunar motion. He only knows that the moon rises from the same place each night, that it fades and returns, and that its silver glow keeps away the fear of the dark. He looks up and sees her there, Selene, Luna, the moon, moving at her eternal pace. To him, she is neither goddess nor stone, but companion. She gives no answers, offers no miracles. She only watches, and in that watching, he feels less alone in time. The shepherd's descendants will build telescopes, write calendars, send machines into orbit, but none of that will change the essential experience, that quiet sense of being observed by something vast and calm, something that has always been there. Perhaps that is why the story of Selene endures. It is not a tale of triumph or tragedy, but of endurance, a reminder that even the slowest motion, repeated faithfully, can become divine. And so, the moon's chariot continues its endless circles, passing over the mountains of Arcadia, the ruins of Latmus, the cities of the modern world, and the seas that still shimmer with her pull. She never stops. She never hurries. She never forgets the shepherd who sleeps beneath her light. And perhaps, tonight, as she rises once more, she still pauses, just for a heartbeat, to look down and wonder, does anyone still remember her name? Before men learned to cook, to melt, to forge, before the sound of hammer on bronze ever echoed through the Aegean valleys, the world was, according to the Greeks, a dim and chilly place. It was not dead, but unfinished. The gods had shaped the mountains and the seas, but they had left the valleys bare. Animals roamed the forests, but the race of mortals had not yet been born. In those early imaginings, creation was not a single act of thunderous power, but a kind of slow craftsmanship, the work of patient hands. Among the Titans, older even than Zeus, there was one who loved the art of making. His name was Prometheus, the forethinker. Unlike his brother Epimetheus, the afterthinker, he moved carefully, always planning ahead. The Greeks did not see him as a hero in the modern sense. He was not strong like Heracles, nor divine like Apollo. He was a craftsman, a potter of the divine world. And in the ancient Greek imagination, that made him something rare, a god who worked with his hands. The slow work of creation. The poets say that Prometheus shaped the first humans from clay, the same clay that potters used in every Greek village. It was not magical or celestial, but ordinary earth mixed with water. Even in myth, it was described in practical terms: the damp soil from riverbeds, the fine red dust from Attica's hills, the kind that could be kneaded slowly until it held a form. To imagine Prometheus at his workbench, is to glimpse an ancient metaphor for patience. He was not commanding armies of light, but sitting beside a river, molding figures with care. One by one, he shaped the limbs and faces of creatures who might one day walk and speak. Around him, the sun warmed the earth. Birds called in the reeds, the gods above, uninterested in such slow labor. Let him be. Creation, in this telling, was not a moment of glory, but an afternoon's work. He might have smoothed the clay with his thumb, pressed small hollows for eyes, carved the faint lines of a mouth. The myth, told this way, feels less divine and more human, the story of someone crafting life, not in haste, but in devotion. In Hesiod's Theogony, Prometheus's shaping of mankind is only briefly mentioned, yet that silence speaks volumes. For the Greeks, creation itself was less impressive than the maintenance of life, the daily tending, the making and remaking of order. Prometheus's slow work, therefore, mirrored their own. Just as potters turned their wheels and sculptors shaped marble, so too did the Titan form humanity through persistence, not miracle. Clay, water, and the breath of the gods, once the clay figures were finished. Prometheus is said to have sought a spark of divine spirit to animate them. Some versions claim he went to Athena, goddess of wisdom and craft, and asked her to breathe life into his creations. Others say he did it himself, by trickery or skill. In either case, the act was quiet, a gentle breath, not a flash of thunder. The choice of clay mattered deeply to the Greeks. It was the material of both creation and burial. The same earth that formed the living also covered the dead. In shaping mankind from clay, Prometheus made mortals doubly bound to the soil. We were not separate from the ground, but continuous with it. Even in myth, the Greeks imagined humans as creatures of dust, capable of thought, yet tethered to decay. Archaeologists have found thousands of clay figurines from early Greek sites, women, animals, deities, and strange hybrid shapes. Each bears fingerprints, small ridges left by ancient makers. These traces show that the Greeks understood creation as tactile, imperfect, intimate. Prometheus's story, then, was not only about divine rebellion, but about the quiet dignity of craftsmanship, the belief that shaping something by hand connects one to the eternal. Prometheus, the craftsman in Greek thought, craftsmanship tekton was sacred. The word meant more than skill. It meant a way of understanding the world through making. Potters, weavers, shipwrights, and smiths were seen as reflections of the divine order, imitating the gods' own creativity on a smaller scale. Prometheus, therefore, was not simply a mythic figure, but a symbol of every artisan who worked with patience and foresight. His creation of man from clay was an allegory for civilization itself, the transformation of raw material into form, of chaos into purpose. In Athens, potters along the Kerameikos, the city's potter's quarter, shaped vessels from the same reddish earth believed to have birthed humanity. The air there was thick with dust and kill smoke, the smell of wet clay turning to stone. Every amphora or cup they made echoed Prometheus's first act, the molding of shape from formlessness. To the Greeks, this was no accident. Their myths blurred easily into their daily labor. The gods, they believed, worked just as men did, with tools, with sweat, with time. a world without fire. Yet in those earliest versions, Prometheus's creation was incomplete. The humans he made could move, breathe, even speak, but they had no fire. They lived cold lives, shivering through night and winter, unable to cook food or forge tools. Their clay bodies were alive, but not yet civilized. The myth captures something essential about the Greek understanding of progress. To them, humanity's rise was not a sudden leap, but a long, uneven journey, from mud to warmth, from silence to speech, from darkness to flame. Fire, in their imagination, was not simply light, but the first technology, the beginning of all later arts. In the quiet valleys of Thessaly or the stony islands of the Aegean, ancient villagers must have felt this truth daily. Fire was life, the center of the household, the protector against night, the means to bake bread and harden pottery. Without it, a home was only shelter. The Greeks likely saw Prometheus's theft of fire not as rebellion for its own sake, but as the essential completion of creation, the final step that made humans truly human. The hesitation of the god Zeus, the ruler of Olympus, had forbidden mortals from possessing fire. In the cosmic order of the early myths, the gods hoarded light. Fire belonged in the heavens or in the volcanic heart of the world, not in human hands. When Prometheus watched his creations shiver in darkness, he saw not sin but imbalance. The gods, he thought, had forgotten what it meant to need warmth. His compassion for mankind, a rare quality among divine beings, led him to defy Zeus. But even before he stole the flame, his decision took time. He observed, planned, and waited for the right moment. His rebellion, like his creation, was deliberate and methodical. Some stories say he tricked Zeus twice, first by offering him 2 sacrifices, one of good meat hidden in an unappealing wrapping, the other of bones disguised in fat. Zeus, choosing the latter, set a precedent that mortals would forever keep the best parts of the offering for themselves. Enraged, Zeus denied humanity the gift of fire. Prometheus's response was not a roar of defiance, but quiet determination. He climbed Olympus, found a burning ember from the sun's chariot, and concealed it within a hollow reed. The theft itself, in many versions, is almost anticlimactic, a small, careful act, the work of nimble fingers rather than flashing swords. When he returned, he offered the spark to mankind. That single flame, placed into mortal hands, changed everything. The quiet revolution. The Greeks never imagined the gift of fire as a sudden miracle. In their minds, it was a slow unfolding, much like the dawn. With fire, humans learned to cook their food, to shape metals, to bake clay, to drive away beasts. Villages formed around hearths. The smoke rising from chimneys became a new kind of offering to the heavens. Archaeologically, the timing is poetic. The mastery of fire marks one of the first great leaps in human prehistory. For the ancient storytellers, this was proof enough that their myth contained truth. The Titans might be gone, but their lessons remained, that knowledge, once kindled, must be tended carefully, or it fades back into coldness. Prometheus's act, so modest in its telling, became the hinge of civilization. His slow, thoughtful defiance gave humanity not just warmth, but time, the ability to plan, to cook, to build. Fire allowed for leisure, and leisure allowed for thought. The philosophers who would later ponder the stars owed their existence to that one quiet theft. clay and flame in a symbolic sense. Mankind became a union of opposites. The cool, damp earth of creation and the hot, consuming spark of fire. One grounded, one restless. The Greeks saw this balance everywhere, in art, in craft, in life itself. Pottery, for example, was the perfect metaphor. Soft clay, hardened by flame, into something enduring. To make a pot was to repeat Prometheus's act on a smaller scale. You shaped the earth, breathed form into it, and gave it permanence through fire. Perhaps this is why so many early Greek myths treat craftsmanship as sacred, because each potter's skill was, in essence, a miniature creation story. The long shadow of foresight, whose name means forethought, understood the risk of his gift. He knew Zeus would not forgive the disobedience, yet he accepted punishment as the price of foresight. In this sense, his story foreshadows humanity's own paradox, the awareness that every tool carries danger, that every progress comes with cost. Later generations would call him a martyr for knowledge, a symbol of the thinker who suffers for truth. But in the early myth, his defiance feels less heroic than inevitable. He acted because he could not bear to see his creations suffer. His rebellion was born not from pride, but from empathy, perhaps the slowest, quietest, and most human motive of all. After the spark of fire was stolen and placed carefully in mortal hands, Prometheus returned to his workshop among the hills and riverbeds, watching as clay figures, now warmed and animated, began to move in ways he had only imagined. They stirred slowly at first, tentative and awkward, their limbs stiff from the damp earth, their eyes reflecting the faint glow of the stolen flame. The world was no longer empty, yet it was fragile, suspended between creation and destruction. Above Zeus, king of the gods, did not remain idle. He had long observed Prometheus's patient craftsmanship, his careful attention to detail, his foresight in shaping mankind. For a time, he tolerated it. The clay figures were harmless, quiet, and unremarkable. But the theft of fire was different. That single ember represented not only warmth and light, but knowledge, skill, and ultimately, independence. Zeus could not allow mortals to operate outside divine control. The weight of punishment. Zeus's response was deliberate, slow, and precise. The kind of punishment, like Prometheus's creation, required planning. He did not strike immediately with thunderbolts or send armies of divine fury. Instead, he created something subtle, a mechanism that would endure. A quiet horror. Prometheus was bound to a remote cliff in the far reaches of the Caucasus Mountains, where the winds howled through bare rock and snow clung to the earth even in summer. Chains of bronze, unbreakable and cold, held him fast. The poet Hesiod tells us that each day an eagle would descend to feed upon his liver, which would regenerate each night. The slow, repetitive nature of this torment was its cruelty. The pain never ended. Yet it never escalated to immediate death. It was a cycle of suffering, as patient and eternal as the Titan himself in the human imagination. The scene is both terrifying and strangely mundane. One can picture Prometheus, chained but alert, enduring the cold and hunger, knowing that the same sun and rain that nurtured his clay creations now beat upon his body. His torment was public in its symbolic meaning, but private in its experience, a daily act of persistence. Much like his previous labor at the potter's wheel, the lesson for mankind, for mortals. The story of Prometheus's punishment became a quiet, almost practical warning. Knowledge, skill, and independence came at a price. Every time a blacksmith stoked a fire in a village forge or a cook tended a hearth, the risk of harm and effort mirrored the Titan's own suffering. Civilization itself was an inheritance of both gift and burden. But there was another, subtler lesson, one the Greeks often overlooked in the excitement of divine retribution. Prometheus's chains, while painful, did not prevent him from acting. Even bound, he remained clever and attentive. Later myths, particularly those told by Aeschylus in the Prometheus Bound, emphasize his ability to foresee, to counsel, and to influence events despite captivity. Punishment was slow and tedious, but it could not fully constrain the mind or spirit. Humans, who had received fire, could similarly endure hardship, adapt, and innovate. In the quiet rhythm of daily toil, tending flocks, shaping clay, baking bread, they learned resilience. The myth, in this sense, became a blueprint for perseverance, a tale of patience, suffering, and the quiet triumph of foresight. Fire in the village. In the world below, humanity began to discover the potential of Prometheus's gift. Fire transformed ordinary life in small, almost imperceptible ways. It allowed bread to rise and meat to cook, freeing time previously spent in hunger and labor. Clay, which once dried weakly in the sun, could now be hardened in kilns, giving rise to pottery, tiles, and durable tools. Even the forge, where metal was bent and hammered into shape, became a monument to Prometheus's quiet craftsmanship. The Greeks, living in villages scattered across islands and peninsulas, likely observed these transformations without connecting them to a single figure. Yet, in retrospect, every hearth and kiln, every smoldering forge, was a continuation of the Titan's labor. Fire, slow to spread and requiring careful tending, demanded patience. It was a daily, repetitive miracle, echoing the slow movements of clay figures under Prometheus's hands, the subtle growth of civilization as centuries passed. The gift of fire allowed humans to settle in permanent communities. They could store food, keep warm through cold winters, and work metal to craft tools and weapons. Society began to accumulate knowledge across generations. No longer did humans depend solely on instinct. They could plan, experiment, and pass lessons from one group to another. In the myth, this progress is understated. Prometheus does not deliver a sudden revolution. There is no shout of triumph, no instant empire. The change is slow, almost invisible, measured in nights spent stoking hearths and months spent tending crops. Civilization unfolds gradually, quietly, just as the Titan molded his first clay figures, one careful hand at a time. The slow interference of the gods even as humans advanced. Zeus's vigilance never waned. He introduced Pandora, another subtle, almost administrative measure of control. The first woman, created from clay and divine inspiration, carried a jar of evils and minor blessings. Unlike fire, which offered utility, Pandora represented the complexity of living under divine oversight, unpredictability, risk, and small misfortunes that accumulated over time. The myth does not dwell on chaos and catastrophe. Instead, it emphasizes measured consequence. human progress is never uninterrupted. Every gift, no matter how essential, carries strings, moral, practical, or divine. Mortals learned to balance curiosity with caution, creation with observation, initiative with restraint. Prometheus's foresight anticipated this complexity. By giving humans fire, he did not merely bestow warmth. He introduced responsibility, patience, and the long shadow of consequence. In this, the myth mirrors the mundane reality of ancient life. From digging a trench to sculpting clay, involved foresight and endurance. The quiet heroism of labor, the story of Prometheus, is often remembered for rebellion and punishment, but its quieter core is labor itself. He teaches that slow, deliberate work, whether forming clay, tending fire, or shaping society, carries significance. The Greeks, in their daily lives, reflected this principle. Villagers and artisans understood that nothing lasting arises without patience. A poorly fired pot would crack. A mismanaged fire could destroy a home. Order, durability, and skill were inseparable from careful, repetitive effort. Even the punishment of Prometheus mirrors this lesson. His torment is slow, tedious, cyclical, a mirror of the labor he first undertook in creating humanity. Pain, like craftsmanship, becomes endurance, and endurance becomes its own quiet form of triumph. The distance of time by the Hellenistic era. Prometheus's story had migrated beyond its mythic landscape. Poets, philosophers, and artists retold it with variations, but the essential pattern endured. The careful creation of humanity, the gift of fire, and the slow, inevitable consequences of foresight. Each retelling added nuance, yet the focus remained deliberate. The Greeks admired subtlety over spectacle, the process over the outcome. In this sense, Prometheus's tale is much like the quiet rhythm of the moon in the previous story, a slow, patient measure of time and change. Humans, born of clay and fire, advance incrementally. Progress is not a leap, but a steady accumulation of acts, each small and essential. Prometheus remained bound to the cliff for countless days and nights. The eagle, descending predictably, each visit, a quiet, precise infliction of pain. Yet even in this seemingly endless punishment, there is a sense of continuity. Just as he had shaped humanity slowly, deliberately, so too did his suffering unfold in rhythm. There were no sudden eruptions of violence. Each day was similar to the last, measured and inevitable. In this repetition lies the core of Prometheus's story, the reminder that endurance, patience, and foresight are as powerful as fire itself. While the gods above debated and plotted, humans learned to carry the gift he had provided. Hearths glowed in villages, kilns fired pottery, and forges rang out the measured clang of metal shaping. The quiet heroism of labor was no longer divine alone. It belonged to every human who tended a flame, molded clay, or built with care. The responsorly humans, according to the myth, were slow to understand the full scope of Prometheus's gift. Fire offered warmth and protection, yes, but it also demanded responsibility. Mishandled, it could destroy homes, crops, or lives. The Greeks, observing their own reliance on fire, could see this clearly. The myth was not just about divine generosity, but about the careful stewardship of power. Mortals began to develop skills and rituals around fire. Kitchens became spaces of both utility and observation. Priests lit sacred flames for festivals, maintaining them for weeks or months. Villagers kept hearths alive through winter, teaching children the careful handling of embers. The gift of fire was transformative, yet it required repetition, discipline, and patience, the same qualities Prometheus had used to shape humans from clay. Prometheus's chains and the lesson of forethought while humans prospered. Prometheus's punishment continued. Yet, even here, the myth emphasizes a quiet dignity. He is not helpless. He endures, observes, and even counsels others, particularly in later versions where he advises mortals on agriculture, metalworking, and civic life. Suffering is not wasted. It becomes a continuation of his gift. This teaches an essential lesson. Foresight carries cost. Every advance, every clever solution has consequences, often slow, cumulative, and unglamorous. Yet these consequences do not negate the value of the act itself. By thinking ahead, by acting deliberately, Prometheus ensured that humanity could endure, even if he himself bore the pain, the long shadow of the myth over the centuries. Poets and philosophers reflected on this slow drama. Aeschylus, in Prometheus Bound, framed the story as a meditation on suffering, justice, and endurance. Later, Roman writers, medieval scholars, and Renaissance thinkers continued to interpret Prometheus as both rebel and benefactor, the quiet, patient figure whose act of creation was inseparable from the slow unfolding of consequence. In art, the Titan appears chained, serene, yet unbroken, his gaze fixed beyond immediate torment. Pain and patience intertwine. It is a depiction not of explosive heroism, but of deliberate, sustained effort, a reflection of the myth's original tone: fire, civilization, and patience. The Greeks understood that human progress was not sudden. Each technological advance, metal tools, agricultural techniques, baking, weaving, required careful repetition and observation. Civilization advanced as steadily as Prometheus's daily torment. The myth, when read in this light, becomes a blueprint for measured progress. Work slowly, act with foresight, accept consequences, and endure. Even the punishment itself mirrors the process of learning. Just as Prometheus's chains and the eagle teach endurance, so too does fire teach caution. Each hearth demands attention. Each kill requires careful tending. Every step forward in civilization, no matter how small, is built on consistent, patient effort. The return of freedom. In some later versions of the myth, Heracles eventually frees Prometheus. This act is swift and dramatic, in contrast to the slow unfolding of previous events. Yet the story never forgets the importance of time and patience. The gift of fire had already taken root in humanity. Chains and punishment could not undo its influence. The spark had been planted, and civilization would continue to grow. Fueled by knowledge, skill, and careful labor, Prometheus's release, then, is less about rescue than about recognition, the enduring value of foresight, and the quiet power of persistent action. Humanity, too, benefits not from heroics alone, but from the accumulation of patient effort across generations. The modern echo. Even today, the story resonates. Every potter shaping clay, every engineer tending circuits, every cook tending a stove participates unknowingly, in Prometheus's quiet labor. Fire remains central to human life, from the warmth of a home to the energy powering modern technology. Each innovation echoes the slow, deliberate gift first given by the forethinker Titan. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect is that Prometheus's story is not loud. There are no dramatic battles or explosive miracles. Instead, it is the story of patience, endurance, and foresight, virtues easy to overlook but essential for survival. Civilization, after all, is not built in a day, and even divine gifts unfold gradually. The quiet triumph of Prometheus' true victory lies not in escaping chains or defying Zeus, but in the steady impact of his actions. The first humans, born of clay and warmed by fire, learned to endure, to create, and to sustain themselves. They inherited not only warmth, but the lesson that thoughtful action, repeated carefully over time, carries power beyond immediate perception. In this way, the myth returns to its quiet core. Slow, deliberate work shapes life. The ripple of foresight flows outward, touching countless generations. Fire, clay, and patience together form the bedrock of human civilization, and Prometheus, ever watchful, remains its quiet patron. And so we are left with the final reflection, the spark that warms us, the clay that forms us, and the chains that once bound the giver, all remind us that the greatest power often lies in patience, foresight, and endurance. Even in a world impatient for quick results, slow, steady action shapes the future more profoundly than any single moment of brilliance. High above the valleys, where clouds curled lazily around jagged peaks and sunlight sifted through the morning mist, Mount Olympus rose as a slow and silent kingdom. In the distant past, the gods were not only figures of thunder, wisdom, or vengeance, but also custodians of the quietest, most essential forms of life. The bees, the Greeks believed, were both practical and symbolic. They produced honey, an important food and offering, and represented the slow rhythm of diligence, order, and patience. They were not winged symbols in a painting alone. They were understood in the real, tactile world. Villagers and shepherds in Thessaly and Arcadia watched them hum steadily from flower to flower, transferring pollen with careful repetition, shaping landscapes and crops without fanfare. The myths suggested that even gods required honey. It was not simply indulgence, but sustenance. The sweet substance symbolized longevity, vitality, and the careful accumulation of labor over time. The Olympians, living in their gleaming halls above the clouds, were portrayed as receiving honey directly from the bees of the divine orchards, stored slowly in golden combs. One can imagine the hive-like chambers of Olympus, quiet except for the soft hum of wings, the drip of nectar into cells, the methodical rhythm of creation, a universe of order within the lives of immortals. Honey as a divine metaphor in early Greek culture. Honey was highly valued. Archaeologists have found pots of preserved honey in Mycenaean tombs, and even centuries later, honey continued to feature in offerings, medicines, and ritual libations. Its significance was not merely taste, but process. It required patience, consistency, and attentiveness. Bees did not hurry. They gathered nectar slowly, day by day, season by season. The gods, in myths, were depicted as respecting this rhythm. Hesiod, in his works and days, emphasizes the importance of labor and timing. The Greeks observed the bee's discipline as a natural law. Sowing, tending, gathering, and harvesting all occurred in a slow, deliberate pattern. Their efficiency was admired precisely because it lacked drama. The bee's constant, methodical work mirrored the quiet virtues of human diligence, virtues the gods themselves seemed to reward. Even in small villages near Olympus, farmers would offer honey to Zeus and the other gods, believing that the slow accumulation of the sweet substance mirrored the patient growth of crops and human effort. Honey, like fire in Prometheus's story, represented both nourishment and the fruits of careful labor. It was ordinary in production, but extraordinary in consequence. The hive and the home Mount Olympus was imagined as more than the abode of mighty deities. It was a landscape of small routines, hives perched in sunlighted alcoves, filled with hexagonal cells crafted with uncanny precision. The bees' wings vibrated in calm harmony, producing a background hum that echoed faintly through marble halls. Nectar flowed into combs at its own pace, drawn from divine gardens where flowers bloomed. Seasonal order, the gods' honey, unlike mortal honey, was slow to collect, almost as if time itself moved differently at their altitude. It was a measure of patience and order, reminding even immortals that some things cannot be rushed. Zeus, Hera, Athena, and Apollo, attending their divine feasts, did so in recognition of this slow production. Their sustenance was not instantaneous. It required waiting, attentiveness, and respect for natural rhythm. For humans, the lesson was clear but subtle. The sweetness of life is earned slowly. Every hour spent tending fields, watching flocks, or maintaining a hearth reflected the same principle. The honey of the gods was not simply food. It was a measure of time and care, a reminder that enduring reward rarely comes in haste. The ritual of observation bees were observed meticulously. Shepherds noted which flowers yielded the richest nectar, which winds encouraged foraging, and how temperature affected the bees' flight. These small, repetitive acts of attention connected mortals to the rhythm of nature and, by extension, to the slow order of Olympus. Myths emphasized this connection. Apollo's association with the Delphic oracle sometimes included honey cakes as offerings, a subtle nod to the disciplined work of bees. Artemis, goddess of wild places, was linked to hives hidden in forests, demonstrating how patience in observation allows understanding and harmony with nature. The bees' labor became a bridge between human effort and divine expectation, quiet, persistent, and essential. Even when honey was gathered by humans, the ritual echoed that of Olympus, slow, methodical, and deliberate. Bees and humans shared a rhythm, a dance of patience and reward. The godly process mirrored the mundane one. Nectar collected in golden cells, combs filled gradually, sweetness emerging only after days and weeks of repetition. Mount Olympus, as a slow gardenly landscape itself, encouraged a slow pace. Gardens of olive, thyme, and wildflowers provided nectar across seasons. Streams trickled in gentle patterns, and the wind carried scents methodically across valleys. Gods walked these spaces with calm deliberation, and the bees followed. Even the air seemed measured, the atmosphere structured to maintain the slow, unhurried work of the hives. It is tempting to imagine Olympian mornings punctuated not by lightning or proclamations of war, but by the hum of bees, the careful tending of nectar, and the observation of the slow unfolding of life. This perspective transforms the divine into something intimate and ordinary, yet profoundly meaningful. Even gods, it seems, cannot escape the quiet discipline of patient work. The lesson for humans, the Greeks, attuned to small rhythms and natural cycles, recognized in these myths a moral of gentle persistence, observation, repetition, and care. Even in apparently trivial tasks, shaped both divine and human life. The bee's hum is quiet, almost boring to an untrained ear. Yet it orchestrates the foundation of nourishment, health, and civilization. In this, Mount Olympus is less a place of spectacle than a slow machine of order. Gods and humans alike benefit from recognizing the value of patience. Rewards, whether honey, sustenance, or insight, do not arrive instantly. They accrue over time, through careful work and attention, echoing the steady, unhurried cycles of nature. By watching the bees and understanding their methods, humans were reminded that even the grandest outcomes begin with small, repetitive steps. The sweetness of the gods is mirrored in the everyday diligence of mortals, tending flocks, sowing fields, observing the slow changes of the seasons. Each act of patience echoes the divine, connecting mortal lives to the quiet rhythm of Olympus. And so, in the shadow of the great mountain, among clouds and sunlit hives, the bees worked slowly, the gods observed patiently, and humans, in their villages, learned the quiet power of time, repetition, and care. But even as the bees hum through the long hours, one wonders how much of their slow labor shaped the lives of mortals beyond the nectar they carried, and how many lessons went unnoticed in the hum of the mountains. Long after the first myths were whispered in Thessalian valleys, Mount Olympus remained not only a seat of power, but a quiet laboratory of natural rhythm. The bees' work went unnoticed by most humans, yet it shaped both divine and mortal life in subtle, almost bureaucratic ways. Their hives were not merely collections of wax and nectar. They were the embodiment of order, slow accumulation, and measured productivity principles that the gods themselves appeared to respect and, occasionally, enforce. The discipline of the hive bees are meticulous creatures. In the myths, they follow invisible hierarchies, guided by instinct and subtle signals. Each worker collects nectar, builds comb, and tends larvae in perfect sequence, a system that mirrors the careful organization of Olympus itself. The gods, although immensely powerful, are depicted as recognizing and respecting these routines. Even Zeus, known for thunder and wrath, tolerates the bees' precise schedules, leaving them undisturbed in their sunlit alcoves. The Greeks, observing the natural world, would have seen parallels in human society. Farmers and shepherds learned to structure their days around seasonal changes, weather, and crop cycles. In this, the myths encouraged patience and attentiveness, illustrating that the smallest, most repetitive acts, whether be flight or fieldwork, were foundational for survival and prosperity. Nectar, as a measure of time, honey, in Greek myth, is more than food. It is a chronometer, a record of persistence. Bees collect nectar slowly, drop by drop, over weeks and months, producing a resource that is as much the result of time as of effort. The god's honey, stored in golden combs, symbolizes the slow accrual of benefit from sustained labor. Mortals, too, could recognize this rhythm. Observing bees taught them the importance of pacing. To reap the sweetest rewards, one must work consistently, without haste. A careless hand might crush a comb or spill precious nectar, just as impatience in daily labor could ruin crops or pottery. The myth embeds a lesson. Patience is not passive. It is active, repeated, and precise. The god's dependence on patience in mythic accounts, honey, is not a luxury for the gods. It is a necessity. It fuels rituals, powers sacred feasts, and sustains divine vitality. But unlike other divine gifts, it cannot be summoned instantaneously. Bees do not obey commands. They work in their own time, following a rhythm older than Olympus itself. This dependence subtly humanizes the gods. Despite their immense power, they rely on slow, careful labor, a reminder that even immortality cannot bypass the laws of nature. Hermes may fly swiftly across the heavens, and Apollo may strike the lyre with speed and precision, but their nourishment arrives at the pace dictated by small winged workers. For humans, the lesson is both practical and symbolic. Patience governs outcomes. Labor that is slow, steady, and respectful of natural rhythm yields reward. Hasty, careless effort risks waste. The bees embody this truth, hovering in golden light while the world below rushes and struggles. Honey as a bridge between worlds, the sweet substance also serves as a connection between the mortal and divine. Priests and villagers alike offered honey in rituals, presenting it to temples and altars as tribute. Its slow production mirrored the slow accumulation of merit, favor, and knowledge. In this way, honey became a bridge. The careful, repetitive work of bees elevated ordinary substances into sacred tools. Greek myths are often remembered for drama, battles, quests, heroic feats, but here, the drama is muted, almost imperceptible. The tension lies in timing and order. If the bees' work falters, the offerings fail. If mortals neglect their own labor, crops wither. In these quiet moments, the rhythm of life is preserved or disrupted. The hum of continuity, imagine the soft hum of bees through Olympus halls, their wings beating in regular, measured pulses. Each hum is both sound and time, a steady reminder that the world progresses not through bursts of effort, but through continuous, careful work. Even gods pause to listen. Athena, goddess of wisdom, watches the hives, noting how small actions accumulate into lasting benefit. Artemis, wandering forests and fields, observes betrayals as markers of fertility and season. Humans, in their villages far below, could witness the same patterns. The slow flowering of time, the gradual ripening of figs, the patient watchfulness of sheep and goats, all are echoes of the bee's order. The myth teaches that observing, understanding, and cooperating with natural rhythms is as important as strength or cleverness. The invisible labor of life, the influence of bees, extends beyond honey. By pollinating flowers, they shape landscapes and ecosystems. Ancient Greeks may not have understood the full biological implications, but they recognized that life depends on persistent, repetitive acts. A single bee flight may seem insignificant, yet over time It sustains food sources, aromas, and harvests. In this, the bees become a metaphor for civilization itself, slow, often invisible, cumulative. Every small act matters. The gods' reliance on honey reflects a universal truth. Even those with immense power cannot ignore the fundamental work that underpins existence. The lesson of quiet, laboring, the hum of Olympus bees. Humans are reminded that patience is a form of wisdom. Progress is rarely instantaneous. Civilization, knowledge, and survival depend on small, repeated efforts. Fire, as Prometheus gave it, transforms through repeated tending. Honey, as the bees produce it, sweetens through gradual accumulation. Both myths converge on the same truth. Slow labor yields lasting benefit, and hasty effort risks loss. The gods' honey, slow and methodical, teaches a subtle kind of reverence for time. It asks mortals to notice the unremarkable, to value repetition, and to understand that even immortals are subject to the laws of patience. A lingering question, and yet, despite the careful rhythms of bees and gods, one must wonder how many lessons go unnoticed in the hum of the hive. How many moments of patient labor pass without recognition, both in Olympus and in mortal villages below. Perhaps the sweetness of life is always accumulating, but rarely observed in its slow, deliberate formation. The bees of Mount Olympus, unseen by mortal eyes, continued their quiet labor, shaping nectar into golden honey. Their wings beat in regular rhythm, a subtle reminder that even the divine is subject to process and patience. This slow accumulation, nearly imperceptible, day by day, became a cornerstone of both myth and practical life. While the gods dined and deliberated, their sustenance arrived not instantly, but gradually. Honey was measured, stored, and savored. The same nectar that sweetened ambrosial cakes at feasts also served as a symbol, a reward for steady effort, careful observation, and respect for time. Its production was deliberate, unhurried, and dependable, unlike many mortal pursuits, prone to disruption or impatience. The invisible architects of civilization, mortals, far below Olympus, observed the bees in their own gardens and fields. Farmers took note of flower blooms, weather patterns, and pollination cycles. Shepherds watched as bees moved systematically from plant to plant, ensuring that orchards and wildflowers produced fruit and seeds. In these repetitive acts, they saw a blueprint for survival. The success of labor depends on timing, attentiveness, and consistency. Honey became more than food. It became a marker of civilization's progress. Its production required patience, skill, and attention to detail. Each jar, each drop, represented the fruits of repeated, careful work. Just as Prometheus had given humans fire, the bees' slow labor gave humans insight into the value of rhythm, persistence, and foresight. Divine patience reflected in mortal life. Mount Olympus, often imagined as a place of spectacle, was also a kingdom of quiet regulation. The gods' reliance on bees illustrates a profound lesson. Even beings with immense power cannot escape the rules of time and effort. Zeus, for all his thunder and authority, depended on nectar arriving at its own pace. Athena and Artemis respected the orderly work of hives, noting its reflection in wisdom and hunting alike. For humans, This observation reinforced the importance of patient labor. Crops could not be rushed, flocks required steady tending, and even craftwork demanded meticulous repetition. Life, Greek thinkers recognized, advanced most reliably through steady accumulation of small acts. The bees, in this sense, were teachers, demonstrating that progress is the result of quiet, continual effort. Honey, ritual, and observation. Humans integrated these lessons into ritual life. Honey was offered in temples, not simply as a luxury, but as a symbol of careful, sustained work. Priests maintained sacred hives, watched seasons, and ensured that offerings reflected the rhythms of nature. Villagers learned that the sweetness of the gods' gift required observation and patience. To neglect it, or to attempt to hasten the process, risked both waste and disrespect. The ritual use of honey mirrors the broader lesson of mythology. Life's most important outcomes are often invisible until accumulated. The bee's work is silent, repetitive, and steady, qualities mirrored in human labor, craft, and daily survival. Even a single missed day in the hive or the field has consequences over time. Civilization is built quietly in incremental steps. The long shadow of small acts, the myths suggest that the slow work of bees influenced not only the gods, but also human understanding of the natural world. By paying attention to small patterns, Greeks could anticipate harvests, manage resources, and maintain harmony with nature. Even the smallest winged laborer played a role in shaping the rhythm of life. This recognition of subtle influence is echoed in other myths. The lessons of fire from Prometheus, the slow molding of clay, and the methodical work of bees converge into a single principle. Lasting results emerge from patient, deliberate action. The gods' indulgences are bound to discipline, and humanity thrives when it mirrors that discipline. The sweetness of time. Honey is a slow gift. It accumulates drop by drop, day by day. Its sweetness is not immediate, yet its value endures. The bees, immortal in myth, yet mortal in effort, symbolize the unremarkable work that underpins all growth. Their rhythm teaches that life's rewards are rarely spectacular in the moment. They are gradual, cumulative, and often unnoticed. Even today, the legacy persists. Modern humans, tending gardens, crafting food, or observing nature, unknowingly echo the bee's diligence. Civilization, knowledge, and culture grow slowly, layer by layer, much like the honeycomb cells that fill with golden nectar. The quiet persistence of small actions, repeated steadily, forms the foundation of all achievement. The lingering question: and so, as the bees hum through Olympus halls and the villages below, one is left to wonder how much of life's sweetness arises from unseen, repetitive labor. How often do we overlook the quiet rhythms that sustain us, both in nature and in society? Perhaps the most profound lessons are not found in dramatic moments of myth, but in the small, patient actions that unfold steadily, day by day. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where pine forests thinned into rocky outcrops, and the wind carried the faint scent of distant olive groves, the sanctuary of Delphi sprawled in quiet majesty. This was a place of subtle rhythm, a site where mortals approached the divine not in haste but through careful observation, patient preparation, and deliberate ritual. The greatest of these rituals was prophecy, delivered through the Pythia, the oracle whose words shaped the destiny of kings and cities alike. Yet few remember that among the sacred implements of the temple, one of the slowest, a tortoise, played an unexpected role in measuring time, patience, and the pace of insight. Attuned to the natural world, valued animals not merely as companions or tools, but as participants in the rhythms of sacred life. The tortoise, slow and deliberate, was ideal for illustrating principles of caution, observation, and endurance. Its shell, segmented and precise, symbolized the orderly unfolding of knowledge over time. In the temple precincts, the creature was often used in ritual exercises, particularly in preparation for oracular pronouncements. The tortoise, as timekeeper, the process was painstaking. Priests would place the tortoise on a measured track or path, marking its progress over hours or even days. The creature's slow crawl offered a visible, living gauge of patience, reminding humans that divine wisdom could not be rushed. The Pythias insights, as the Greeks believed, required similar preparation, meditation, purification, and steady alignment with the rhythms of nature. The tortoise moved, unhurried, along stone paths warmed by the sun. Observers, priests, supplicants, and occasionally curious travelers recorded its pace, noting small variations caused by weather, temperature, and terrain. In these tiny adjustments, there was a lesson in attentiveness. Just as the tortoise did not sprint but persisted steadily, so too did the process of receiving and interpreting prophecy demand patience, observation, and quiet diligence, a living symbol of caution in myth. The tortoise is often overshadowed by swifter, flashier animals, the swift horse of Poseidon, the hawk of Apollo, or even Hermes' fleet-footed symbolism. Yet the slow-moving tortoise carried a message that was both practical and symbolic. It reminded mortals that haste could lead to misinterpretation of signs, mistakes in judgment, and premature action. Civilization itself, after all, relies on careful attention, methodical effort, and measured response. In Delphi, the tortoise was more than a symbol. It was a living participant. Priests would place offerings along its path, drops of honey, small morsels of barley, to observe its choices and reactions. These observations were recorded meticulously, the slow unfolding of behavior offering insights into timing, the quality of preparation, and the patient alignment of human action with divine will. Prophecy as patient observation, the Pythias pronouncements, though dramatic in memory and later literature, were the culmination of extended processes. Ritual cleansing, inhalation of vapors, and meditation all required time and repetition. Like the tortoise, the path to insight was measured in steps, slow and deliberate. Each movement mattered, each pause was significant, and rushing could render the process ineffective. Mortals approaching Delphi learned, often unconsciously, that wisdom unfolds incrementally. The slow crawl of a tortoise mirrored the slow accumulation of knowledge, the careful study of omens, and the patient monitoring of natural and human events. Kings seeking advice, generals pondering campaigns, and city officials observing seasonal cycles were all participants in this quiet lesson of tempo. The tortoise and the fate of cities. The tortoise's presence extended beyond individual preparation. It symbolically linked the pace of humans to the longevity of cities. Greek thought emphasized that hasty decisions, whether in governance, warfare, or cultivation could imperil communities. The slow, careful movement of the tortoise embodied the ideal, deliberate action guided by observation, reflection, and foresight. For centuries, Delphi was both a religious and civic hub. Visitors brought questions about crops, battles, alliances, and family fortunes. The slow pace of preparation, mirrored by the tortoise's methodical crawl, taught humility, reminding supplicants that some answers cannot be forced. Patience was rewarded. Impulsiveness brought risk. The creature's deliberate motion was a quiet lesson in governance, strategy, and daily survival. Observation, as ritual priests and assistants, would track the tortoise, sometimes over the course of a full day, noting the rhythm of its steps, its choices, and the consistency of its behavior. They interpreted these observations in relation to omens, seasonal cycles, and celestial movements. The tortoise became a bridge between the observable natural world and the subtle, often ambiguous world of divine communication. Even mundane acts, feeding, observing, recording, became ritualized. Each step the tortoise took was noted, measured, and considered. In this way, time itself became a participant in prophecy, just as Prometheus required patience to shape humanity and the bees of Olympus required attentive observation. The tortoise taught that even slow, repetitive processes have profound significance. The quiet rhythm of life, the symbolism, extended to everyday life. Greek farmers, artisans, and shepherds could understand, in simple terms, the importance of steady effort. Crops take time to grow. Flocks take care to breed and maintain. Skills, crafts, and knowledge accumulate gradually. The slow pace of the tortoise reminded them, and by extension the oracle, that lasting results demand patience, careful attention, and respect for natural rhythms. The tortoise's crawl was methodical, almost hypnotic, encouraging observers to reflect on their own pace. They learned that the slow accumulation of effort, when repeated consistently, leads to predictable and beneficial outcomes. Prophecy, governance, agriculture, and personal skill all depend on these quiet, measured processes. A lingering thought. The tortoise continues its slow journey along the sun-warmed stones of Delphi, a tiny, deliberate participant in a divine and civic drama that spans centuries. Its movements are unremarkable in isolation, yet essential when seen as part of the broader rhythm of life, law, and wisdom. One must wonder, then, how many of life's most important lessons unfold not in sudden flashes of insight, but in the slow, patient observation of small, seemingly insignificant acts. The sanctuary of Delphi, perched high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, was a place where silence and observation were as sacred as prayer and sacrifice. Here, the slow, deliberate crawl of the tortoise held a weight far greater than its size suggested. Its measured progress became a symbol of how divine insight, human action, and the passage of time were intimately connected. The ritual of measurement priests at Delphi employed the tortoise in ways that required both attention and patience. Paths were marked carefully across sun-warmed stone terraces, and the creature's movement was monitored with precision. Each step was noted, recorded, and sometimes interpreted against the positions of the sun, wind patterns, or subtle signs in the surrounding landscape. In effect, the tortoise became a living clock, a reminder that the passage of time itself is integral to understanding. Supplicants, waiting to consult the oracle, might arrive days or weeks in advance. Observing the tortoise along its path, learning in its slow progression the value of patience and attentiveness. In doing so, they were trained to temper their expectations. Wisdom does not reveal itself all at once. Just as the tortoise cannot rush, the truths of the gods cannot be forced. The tortoise and the human mind, the slow movement of the tortoise, also mirrored the careful process of contemplation. The Greeks, particularly philosophers and priests, valued observation as a means to understanding. Watching the creature crawl, recording its progress, and considering small variations in its behavior encouraged a state of mindfulness. The process, although repetitive, sharpened perception. Priests could detect subtle patterns, noting when the tortoise paused, shifted direction, or reacted to minor changes in the environment. These observations, in turn, informed interpretations of omens and advice given to visitors. What seemed insignificant at first, a slight hesitation or a subtle turn, could carry meaningful insights when viewed in the context of time and repeated observation. The oracle's lesson in patience, the Pythia, seated in her chamber above the temple floor, depended on these cumulative lessons. The slow crawl of the tortoise symbolized the pace at which divine knowledge could be integrated into human understanding. Prophetic pronouncements were not spontaneous. They were the result of preparation, observation, and reflection. Visitors who sought guidance on matters of war, agriculture, or civic planning learned an implicit lesson. Patience, attentiveness, and careful documentation yield clearer understanding than impulsive action. The tortoise, moving steadily along its path, taught the value of measured steps and the importance of not rushing toward answers. Slow decisions and the fate of Greek city-states, small and interconnected, depended heavily on careful decision-making. Leaders consulted oracles for guidance, yet the lessons they received were filtered through observation, patience, and deliberate interpretation. The tortoise's crawl became a metaphor for governance. Hasty decisions risked instability, while careful, incremental planning fostered resilience. Even minor deviations in ritual, misinterpretation of signs, or impatience could alter outcomes. The tortoise, slow and precise, illustrated that steady progress, attention to detail, and the acceptance of incremental learning were essential not only for prophecy, but for the survival and flourishing of entire communities. Integration with natural cycles. Temples' priests also observed environmental rhythms. Temperature, wind, and sunlight affected the tortoise's behavior, just as seasons and celestial cycles influenced agriculture and civic planning. By integrating these factors into ritual observation, humans could align their actions with natural patterns, increasing the likelihood of success. The tortoise thus acted as a bridge between the mundane and the divine. Its slow, deliberate pace reminded humans that understanding requires alignment with natural and cosmic rhythms. Impulsiveness or haste, no matter how confident, could disrupt both interpretation and action. Patience in practice. Visitors to Delphi who participated in or witnessed the tortoise rituals absorbed lessons in a subtle, almost subconscious way. Waiting for the creature to move along its path cultivated patience. Recording its progress trained attention. Comparing its behavior against natural patterns encouraged reflection. These quiet practices shaped decision-making, tempering ambition with prudence and aligning action with observation. In this way, the slow crawl of a tortoise became an essential component of human learning. Wisdom was not a sudden revelation, but a gradual accumulation, guided by careful attention and respect for the passage of time. The tortoise, small and unassuming, taught what larger events or dramatic spectacles could not: the power of methodical, patient effort, a lingering question. And as the tortoise continues its deliberate journey across stone and sun, one is left to wonder how much of what shapes the fate of individuals and cities unfolds in quiet observation, unnoticed by most. How many decisions in history, for good or ill, hinge on the slow accumulation of insight that patience alone can provide. The tortoise, moving deliberately along the sun-warmed stones of Delphi, continued its quiet task as if oblivious to the weight of human ambition. Yet every slow step carried significance. Its measured pace had taught the priests, visitors, and supplicants alike that time itself is an instrument of insight, and that even the smallest, seemingly insignificant acts can shape history when observed patiently and interpreted wisely. The oracle's silent teacher, the Pythias chamber, overlooked the paths where the tortoise crawled. Its unhurried movement provided a living rhythm for the priesthood. Each step, each pause, each subtle shift in direction became a marker against which signs were read, questions were considered, and decisions were weighed. The slow pace of the tortoise mirrored the gradual unfolding of wisdom. Knowledge, like the creature's crawl, cannot be forced. It accrues steadily over time. The priests would note patterns, perhaps a hesitation near a patch of moss or a pause in response to the wind. These small details, when recorded over hours and days, were interpreted alongside celestial observations, ritual sequences, and omens from the natural world. What seemed mundane, a tortoise inching along its path, became the foundation of decisions with far-reaching consequences. Prophecy as accumulated observation, prophetic insight. The Greeks believed was not delivered in a single instant. It required the patient collection of signs, careful attention to detail, and repeated observation. The tortoise, moving at its own unhurried rhythm, demonstrated this principle perfectly. Its crawl was a natural measurement of time, teaching humans that the accumulation of small, careful observations yields understanding far more reliably than sudden inspiration. Supplicants learned, sometimes unconsciously, to temper their expectations. Kings and generals, who might otherwise have demanded immediate guidance, came to appreciate the slow process. The tortoise's crawl was a reminder that decisive wisdom requires patience, that insight emerges gradually, and that the fate of cities, like the progress of a single, deliberate creature, unfolds step by step. The fate of cities and the lessons of Dilla Greek. City-states relied heavily on careful decision-making. Consultation with the oracle was a slow, deliberate affair. Hasty actions, untempered by observation and reflection, could lead to poor harvests, military defeat, or political instability. The tortoise, crawling steadily along marked paths, symbolized the virtue of moderation. Progress may be slow, but its outcomes are lasting and reliable. The ritual also reinforced an understanding of cause and effect. Observers learned to correlate small changes, the tortoise's slight pause, the timing of its movement, the effect of environmental conditions with subsequent events. They internalized a principle still relevant today: history, like the tortoise's journey, is shaped incrementally by patient attention to detail and steady effort, observation, patience, and human life beyond prophecy. The tortoise's example shaped broader human behavior. Farmers, artisans, and citizens observed its patience and applied similar principles to their own work. Fields were tended with consistent care. Pottery was shaped slowly and methodically. Livestock was managed attentively. The lessons of the tortoise extended from sacred ritual into everyday life. The value of repeated, deliberate action and the importance of timing in all endeavors. Even the smallest details mattered. A skipped step in ritual, a neglected observation, or a hasty decision could ripple outward, altering outcomes in unpredictable ways. The tortoise's measured crawl reminded all who watched that careful attention, patience, and respect for natural rhythm underpin both human survival and the unfolding of destiny. The quiet triumph of deliberation in the end. The tortoise accomplished its mission not through speed, grandeur, or spectacle, but through the relentless, patient execution of a simple, repetitive task. Its crawl became a mirror of human life and governance. Progress is rarely dramatic. It is cumulative, incremental, and often invisible to those not paying close attention. Perched above the valleys, offered this lesson to all who approached wisdom. Like the tortoise, cannot be hurried. Decisions, like the tortoise's steps, must be measured, deliberate, and attentive to the smallest details. The greatest insights, the safest guidance, and the most enduring achievements emerge slowly, over time, through careful observation and persistent effort, a lingering reflection. And as the tortoise moves steadily along its path, one is left to contemplate the rhythms of life. How many destinies, both human and civic, have been shaped not by sudden inspiration, but by patient accumulation of small, deliberate actions. How often do we overlook the quiet processes that determine outcomes, mistaking speed for progress when, in fact, the slow crawl carries the most enduring lessons? In the quiet villages of ancient Lydia, where the Meander River meandered lazily through sun-dappled valleys and olive groves, there lived a young woman named Arachne. Her skill with thread and loom was unparalleled, a subtle mastery honed not through divine inspiration alone, but through countless hours of patient repetition. The myth often remembers her for her pride, her challenge to Athena, or her eventual transformation. Yet the true story lies in the rhythm of her labor, the slow, deliberate weaving that transformed ordinary threads into intricate tapestries. Arachne's loom was simple but effective, a wooden frame sturdy enough to resist tension, yet nimble enough to allow precise movements of warp and weft. Each day she arrived before sunrise, winding silk or wool carefully, measuring each thread with meticulous care. The soft, repetitive clack of the loom echoed through the small cottage, a steady rhythm that mirrored the quiet unfolding of time itself. To outsiders, her work might have seemed mundane, even monotonous, yet in this monotony lay its power. Every small, precise movement was a step toward perfection. Every patient repetition, a foundation for artistry that could endure generations. The art of observation weaving was not merely mechanical. It required acute observation. Arachne studied patterns in nature, the radial symmetry of flowers, the spirals of shells, the delicate branching of river deltas. She translated these slow, deliberate observations into the geometric precision of her tapestries. Each motif required careful planning, calculating space, aligning threads, anticipating how colors would interact under different lighting, and considering how tension might warp patterns over days of weaving. Her neighbors watched with quiet curiosity. Some came to learn, others merely to admire, but all recognized a truth in her labor. Mastery emerges gradually from repetition, attention, and patience. A single day of weaving produced little in the way of final imagery, yet each day contributed incrementally to the larger, unfolding design. In this, Arachne's craft resembled life itself. Progress is slow, often imperceptible and cumulative. The hum of daily work, the sound of the loom, became part of the landscape, a subtle accompaniment to the river's flow and the rustling of olive leaves. Each clack of the shuttle, each pull of the thread, was a step in a long, deliberate sequence. The process demanded endurance. Mistakes were corrected slowly, threads realigned with care, patterns adjusted with patience. In her small cottage, time seemed suspended, measured not by the sun alone, but by the rhythm of fingers, the tension of threads, and the slow emergence of design. Even in myth, this rhythm is crucial. Arachne's challenge to Athena, often remembered for its dramatic confrontation, was preceded by years of meticulous work. The goddess's arrival was a sudden moment in human memory, but the tapestry that provoked awe or envy had been shaped over countless quiet days. Its perfection was not the result of a single flash of inspiration, but of persistent, patient labor, repeated until the threads themselves seemed imbued with life. The lessons of repetition weaving required more than skill. It demanded mental discipline. Arachne learned to anticipate errors, adjust tension, and maintain focus for hours at a time. Her work taught her that mastery cannot be rushed. Haste would cause fraying, misalignment, or uneven patterns. The slow pace was not merely a constraint, but a teacher, revealing subtle patterns and relationships in threads that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. This understanding extended beyond the loom. Villagers recognized that the same principles applied to daily life. Agriculture, pottery, and even social interaction required steady attention. Crops could not grow in a single day. Clay needed careful shaping and firing. Relationships thrived through repeated small acts of care. In each, the lesson was consistent. Progress is incremental. Patience is essential. And repetition cultivates skill, understanding, and resilience. The loom, as a map of the cosmos, Arachne's tapestries often depicted scenes of gods, mortals, and the natural world in intricate detail. Stars, rivers, and forests were captured with such precision that her work resembled a slow-motion map of existence itself. In her methodical weaving, one could trace the relationships between humans, the divine, and the forces of nature. The loom, then, was more than a tool. It was a lens through which to observe the world, and through patient labor, one could understand patterns invisible to the hasty or inattentive eye. The Greeks recognized this connection. Art, craft, and observation were intertwined with philosophy and daily practice. Arachne's tapestries were admired not only for their aesthetic beauty, but for the reflection of time, rhythm, and process embedded in every carefully aligned thread. They reminded observers that small, repetitive actions accumulate into outcomes of lasting consequence, that the quiet diligence of one person could illuminate truths beyond immediate perception. The slow light of insight even as Arachne worked. Sunlight streamed through the small windows of her cottage, casting shifting patterns of light across the warp and weft. The interplay of shadow and thread required constant adjustment, careful observation, and delicate responsiveness. The slow accumulation of threads mirrored the slow accumulation of knowledge, the patient observation of life, and the quiet shaping of destiny through consistent, deliberate effort. The lesson, subtle but profound, was that insight and achievement emerge not in sudden flashes but in slow, measured accumulation. The loom demanded attention. The process rewarded patience. The results, when viewed in their entirety, revealed the profound value of steady work. Arachne's hands, moving in repeated patterns, became instruments of learning, endurance, and subtle mastery, a lingering question. And so, as the shuttle moved back and forth, carrying thread through the warp in unhurried precision, one might wonder how many of life's most important patterns emerge quietly, shaped by patient repetition and careful attention, unnoticed until the work is complete. How often does the slow accumulation of effort determine outcomes far greater than any single dramatic moment? Arachne's tapestries were more than decoration. They were records of observation, meditations on the natural world, and slow accumulations of knowledge. Each thread, carefully selected and placed, contributed to a pattern that could reveal relationships, cycles, and rhythms invisible to the casual observer. The act of weaving itself became a meditation, a form of quiet scholarship that translated the subtle flow of time and nature into visible form. The slow accumulation of skill, the Greeks understood, is rarely instantaneous. Arachne learned this early. Each day, she returned to her loom, repeating motions that seemed simple, threading the shuttle, aligning warp and weft, checking tension. Yet, in these repetitions, she refined her perception, built muscle memory, and deepened her understanding of symmetry and proportion. The slow pace allowed her to notice subtle variations in color, texture, and pattern, details that might escape a hurried eye. In this patient repetition, Arachne mirrored the processes of life itself. Farmers tended crops day after day, adjusting irrigation and observing growth. Shepherds followed their flocks, noting health, habits, and timing. Artisans honed their craft in incremental steps. Mastery was not achieved by sudden inspiration but by the accumulation of small, attentive acts. Observation embedded in thread. The most striking aspect of Arachne's work was her attention to natural detail. She observed the spirals of shells along riverbanks, the radial symmetry of flowers in meadows, and the subtle flow of clouds across the sky. These observations were embedded in her tapestries, encoded in the careful alignment of threads. Her process emphasized a principle rarely spoken aloud. Understanding arises from slow, deliberate observation. The loom transformed perception into permanence. Patterns that appeared mundane, a branch, a leaf, A winding river carried insights into rhythm, proportion, and the passage of time. Arachne's slow, meticulous work became a map of her world, revealing connections that hurried eyes might never perceive. The role of patience in insight, even minor interruptions in the weaving process, could have consequences. A snapped thread, misaligned warp, or overlooked detail could distort the design. Arachne learned to anticipate such challenges, adjusting carefully and deliberately. In doing so, she internalized a lesson fundamental to human endeavor. Patience and foresight are essential. The slow, measured work of one day supports the integrity of the final creation, just as steady observation in any pursuit ensures clarity and reliability. The Greeks, who valued both craft and philosophy, recognized this principle in broader life. Leaders, scholars, and artisans were all advised to cultivate patience, persistence, and careful attention. Knowledge and skill were accumulations built incrementally and often imperceptibly until they reached a state of meaningful completeness. Threads, as a language of time. Arachne's loom translated hours of observation and repetition into a coherent narrative. The warp and weft became a language, recording movement, light, and cycles of nature. The slow rhythm of her hands mirrored the slow rhythms of the world around her, the rising and setting sun, the gradual changes of seasons, the steady course of rivers. Each completed section of tapestry was a small victory, the result of persistence and careful attention over long stretches of time. Observers who studied her work understood that these tapestries were not just decorative, they were repositories of insight. They encoded a subtle understanding of natural law, human experience, and divine myth. The slow accumulation of effort rendered visible truths that might otherwise remain hidden, revealing a deeper, quieter wisdom. The loom as a teacher, in many ways. Arachne's loom functioned as a teacher. By enforcing repetition, precision, and attentiveness, it shaped not only the product of her labor, but her mind and perception. She learned to anticipate outcomes, recognize patterns, and integrate observation with action. In this, the loom mirrored the slow process of learning itself. Knowledge grows gradually, built from careful attention to detail and consistent practice, not sudden bursts of inspiration. The surrounding villagers absorbed this lesson subtly. Watching her, they came to understand that even in tasks that seem mundane, threading a shuttle, observing a riverbank, tending a garden, slow, deliberate action builds skill, understanding, and insight. The principle extended beyond weaving. All sustained effort, no matter how small, accumulates over time into outcomes of lasting significance. A reflection on time and labor. Arachne's tapestries, though celebrated for their artistry, carry a deeper lesson. They remind us that the slow accumulation of effort, observation, and skill produces results far beyond what single moments of inspiration can achieve. They teach patience, attentiveness, and the quiet satisfaction of work done steadily and well. Even in myth, the transformation of Arachne's skill into a cautionary tale of hubris cannot obscure this truth. The careful, patient accumulation of skill and understanding is itself a form of immortality. Through her threads, she recorded not just stories of gods and mortals, but the rhythms, patterns, and quiet persistence of life itself. A lingering question. And so, as the shuttle moves slowly back and forth, threading its way through the warp, one might pause and wonder how much of the wisdom that shapes lives, communities, and civilizations emerges from patient, repeated effort that goes unnoticed until its impact is fully revealed. How often does the quiet accumulation of attention, day by day, craft outcomes that outlast even the most dramatic moments of history? By the time night fell over the quiet valleys of Lydia, Arachne's small cottage was illuminated only by the soft glow of oil lamps and the pale light of the moon filtering through wooden shutters. The rhythmic clack of her loom persisted, steady and unhurried, casting shadows across the floor and walls. Threads of wool and silk crisscrossed in intricate patterns, capturing light and shadow alike. Each movement of her hands, slow and deliberate, transformed raw materials into a tapestry that reflected not just skill, but time itself, measured, accumulated, and respected the subtle power of accumulation. Arachne's tapestries, once completed, were celebrated not only for their beauty, but for the meticulous attention embedded within every thread. They depicted gods, mortals, and the natural world in exquisite detail, yet the real marvel lay in their process. Each day of work, each patient repetition, contributed to a whole that surpassed immediate recognition. In this slow accumulation, one glimpses a larger truth, enduring mastery, insight, and influence emerge not from sudden brilliance, but from persistent, careful labor over time. The Greeks, in their quiet observation of her craft, recognized a broader lesson. Life, like weaving, is composed of repeated actions, careful tending of crops, thoughtful civic planning, steady study of texts, measured interactions with others. The slow layering of effort, like Arachne's threads, builds results of lasting value. One cannot force a pattern to emerge prematurely. Only patience, attention, and persistence allow it to reveal itself fully. The loom, as a mirror, Arachne's loom, functioned as more than a tool. It was a mirror reflecting the slow, deliberate unfolding of life. Her tapestries encoded not just mythology, but principles of observation, rhythm, and continuity. Those who studied her work could see how incremental effort, repeated day after day, could translate into wisdom, beauty, and understanding. Even mistakes, corrected patiently, became part of the process, illustrating that setbacks are as instructive as achievements when approached with care. In this way, the loom taught humility as well as skill. It reminded the weaver and the observer that the passage of time is integral to the creation of anything meaningful. Haste produces error. Impatience distorts form. Only sustained, mindful attention allows patterns to emerge fully. Whether in art, governance, or daily survival, threads, connecting worlds, or Arachne's tapestries, once displayed, connected ordinary human labor with divine myth. They portrayed the movements of gods, the flow of rivers, and the cycles of stars, all rendered through the slow accumulation of threads. In this, her work became a bridge between the seen and unseen, the mundane and the sacred. The careful repetition of small acts, pulling a thread, aligning warp and weft, adjusting tension, had consequences that resonated far beyond the cottage, illuminating understanding, inspiring, and recording knowledge for posterity. The subtle lesson extended to all who witnessed her work. The slow, deliberate practice of craft shapes not only the object created, but also the mind, perception, and judgment of the practitioner. Time, attention, and patience become tools of insight as much as raw skill or inspiration. The quiet illumination of night after night. The lantern illuminated her threads as they intertwined, revealing intricate patterns that were invisible in haste or shadow. The steady rhythm of weaving became a meditation, a slow translation of observation into permanence. Through repeated practice, small effort accumulated into mastery. Quiet diligence into enduring influence. In watching Arachne, the villagers, visitors, and students of craft glimpsed the same principle, that the slow work of ordinary hands can produce extraordinary results. The drama of myth, contests, punishments, divine interventions is often remembered, but it is the quiet accumulation of effort, patience, and attention that shapes the deepest and most lasting outcomes. A reflection on life and labor, the slow, deliberate work of Arachne teaches a timeless lesson. Life's most enduring patterns emerge from incremental, attentive action. Wisdom, skill, and achievement are the result of patient observation, repeated effort, and careful adjustment. Even small, unnoticed acts, when repeated over time, shape understanding, influence communities, and create beauty that outlasts individual moments. Arachne's loom, threads, and lantern are metaphors for this truth. The slow accumulation of effort and attention illuminates the world, just as the lantern casts light across her threads. Through patience and care, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the quiet labor of one individual can leave a legacy that endures across generations. A lingering question. And so, as the shuttle moves back and forth, threading the tapestry under the gentle glow of the lantern, one is left to ponder how many of life's most meaningful outcomes are crafted in quiet, patient repetition, unnoticed until the pattern is complete. How much of what endures in art, knowledge, or human experience relies not on sudden inspiration, but on the slow, careful accumulation of countless small acts over time. And so, our journey through the quiet corners of history comes to a pause. The workshops, the libraries, the hands that labored patiently, they remain in memory. Even as centuries pass and the world continues to change, remember, the significance of history often lies not in grand events, but in the small, persistent acts of care, curiosity, and human resilience. As you rest, carry these quiet stories with you, allowing the calm rhythms of the past to linger. And when you wake, perhaps you will glimpse, even briefly, the enduring power of ordinary moments that shaped our world. Thank you for joining us in boring past times for sleep. Until the next quiet journey, may your thoughts drift gently like candlelight across ancient parchment.